Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the System 2 podcast. Today, I have Wes Shepherd on with me. Wes he described himself as unemployable since birth, which meant that he had to go into entrepreneurship. And he, throughout his career, built a bunch of companies, including most recently a company called Unifyd that solves big problems in the world of data management. Before we get to that, Wes, welcome on. I'd love to hear your story.
Thanks for having me on. So I guess to kind of feed into that intro, I probably have a slightly atypical background. I was basically born and I grew up in Alaska the first 20 years of my life around a father was a big game guide and mother's family was in construction and gold mining and a variety of enterprises, but every one of them really involved family businesses. So that's probably where I kind of get my my risk-taking appetite. And I think it's a hardy place. You're forged in fire there to get through the winters and some of the challenges. But afterwards, for undergrad, I found myself in Seattle going to the University of Washington for my business degree and quickly fell in love with the technology market. And this was probably coming right up as e-commerce was catching on in the mid to late 90s, and found myself getting into e-commerce related businesses. And so really cut my teeth in the early days there. Found myself, after a sale of a company, moving to Chicago for grad school to go to Northwestern for my MBA. And then probably my second quarter at Northwestern started another company that was really focusing on e-commerce. There's a company called Channel Velocity, but we were one of the first global eBay solution providers that brought like major brands to the platform to sell off like overstocked and refurbished products. So we had everybody from Dyson to Logitech to, I'm trying to think, Nespresso and Philips, for TVs, and we were completely vertically integrated selling products. Eventually beyond eBay, but direct, online, Amazon, and really kind of rode that wave where eBay just kind of exploded in growth online. But that was really, really fun. My first Chicago-based business, and then kind of out of that, spun off my first data company. And I think that's where it got really addictive, because I haven't done anything since but data and analytics. But we were gathering so much e-commerce data to build these models to kind of project how much product to sell per day in an auction environment, how to price it correctly. We started sending this data to various brands, and they were like, my God, I love this. Like, I remember the head of global e-commerce at Logitech saying, I'll pay you way more to tell me about all the opportunities and problems in e-commerce, because we have no idea what people are doing with our product. And we pivoted. So this was company number 2 in Chicago, called Channel IQ. We rapidly grew within a few years to about 400 plus global brands. And we were just monitoring their pricing and merchandising on all the major online advertising and marketplaces. So eBay, Amazon, Google, Price Grabber, what have you. And that turned that into an 8-figure subscription business. And now that company's been sold and acquired and then acquired and acquired. And I think it's part of WPP or something now. Or no, I think it's a Bain-owned company. And then after that transaction, that was in 2016, started Unifyd, which was essentially to be able to take that kind of data, whether it's web data, point of sale data, but basically build a new method of master data management and data quality tools that you would need to do large scale analytics projects. So essentially, the dream I had of building a data business, if I could do it in one system, because we couldn't do it with IBM or Informatica or anyone. We had to custom build these systems. And that was the birth of Unifyd. And then I'm getting to the last company. That's 2016. Fast forward 2020, and seems to be a pattern. I'll start a company, but then I find a better company off of that company. So from Unifyd, we basically get some inbounds from 2 of the largest public cannabis companies globally. And they're trying to gather all of the sales data and web data about cannabis products because the markets exploded 3x during COVID from like 10 to 30 billion. And upon finding our technology and ability to kind of gather that data cleanly and present a data product, they were asking me to start another version of Channel IQ to kind of monitor and gather data globally. And I begrudgingly assented as I dug more and more into the opportunity because, well, I mean, who doesn't like a free spinoff, of an existing business? Fast forward to 2025, we're now, I consider us, the leading data and analytics company in the world when it comes to cannabis with our products. And so I'm still spinning a couple plates with an enterprise software business and um, a fairly sizable data company that grew, I think, 70% this year and 100% the year before. I'll stop there, but that's a lot of ground.
Yeah, no, it's you've done a lot since your early days in Alaska. I'm curious to maybe go back to your childhood because it sounds like that set the stage for the rest of your life that led you into entrepreneurship. What was it like to be in a family where, yeah, your dad was a big game hunter, mom's family was in gold mining? What was a day in the life of Wes back then?
Yeah, early years, flying in Super Cubs or choppers into the Brooks Range, and camping while my father he worked for the Bureau of Land Management and he was responsible for, you have fish and wildlife. So basically two components of resources, right, that we manage in Alaska. He was the wildlife component. He his day job was, until he retired, was to basically run statistical models to estimate the population of moose and caribou and bears and everything, especially because of people harvesting. You'd have hunting seasons and you'd have the native population did a lot of hunting, to subsidize their food needs. So I grew up around that, with a lot of private pilots coming in and out, and ex-Vietnam chopper pilots. It was a crazy time. It was like, this is in the late 70s, early 80s. Um, and so I just, I was bebopping around rural Alaska and I was living in a town of maybe 400 to 500 people with no roads in or out. And then later moved to Fairbanks, which is a little bit larger, but the northernmost city by the Arctic Circle. And that's where I spent a little more time on the other side of my family. And yeah, like I would go hang out and cut down trees and chop wood with my grandfather, who was an incredibly well-respected. His name was James Lundgren, really well-known guy in the construction industry and political circles. But the things we enjoyed most, we'd go out and cut wood and stack the biggest stack of wood in the city. It was literally on TVs is the kind of placeholder between shows on the local channel. We go to it took me to a couple gold mines that we owned, and I got to see how those operated. And, we had partners that would do the placer mining. Like one was placer, one was kind of up in the mountains trying to, with sluices. And, yeah, it was just really, really amazing to see that. But we were mostly into like moving a lot of dirt and gravel, building roads, but there was, there was buildings for the college. And yeah, just amazing to see all the aunts and uncles and cousins. We were all somehow involved in these enterprises, and so that was just kind of normal, right?
What
So
were some
didn't
of
think
your
of things like a job.
Well, I was going to say that, like, what did you end up sort of getting employed by the family companies, or did you end up
Yeah,
helping
like in
out in
high
these?
school, I do odd jobs helping out with some of the property and things like that. And then I'm trying to think. Yeah, I mean nothing too serious, because by the time I was old enough, I was out of high school. I was interested in other things, and I tried my first jobs with other folks, and I actually was a good employee. And I was joking earlier, but I got bored really easy, and I wanted more challenging things to do. So by the time I got down to Seattle and I was just kind of thinking about what's next, I would always have some side hustle. I was living on the beach, what you can call of a beach in Seattle, flipping sports cars and kind of paying my way through college, and it was fun. Uh, but quickly fell into software and started working on one of my first software ventures. And that's where I just got hooked after that. Like I didn't really want to do anything else. I just loved the scale of building technology companies, which is radically different from what I'd grown up doing with my family. My family had a lot of businesses that didn't scale so well, did fine, but weren't going to become very quickly 100 or 200 person enterprise. It wasn't something you could easily distribute. And software, especially the combination of the software and the internet in the 90s, and it was just like panacea.
How did you what was it like to work with family members when you were a kid, or at least to be in a family that had this big family business? And did that impact at all what you then ended up doing in the future? Did you ever work with any
That's
other
a
family members?
really, really, really great question, and one you should ask people when they're on the couch, and I mean the psychologist couch. And I don't know if you're involved with YPO, but I've been in YPO for like the past decade, and I will tell you that is a common discussion point with people with family businesses. So, I dodged probably the worst of that given my side of the family and our interests versus my aunts and uncles and their families and their interests, where they're more attuned to be bringing their kids into the business. I really decided I did not want to be in the guiding business because it was the least scalable business I've ever seen. It was fun, but it was probably a good way to lose money if you really count the costs correctly, but really an amazing thing to do or have. So that really affected me, because I worked a lot on my father's guiding business, basically carving
Yep.
out trails into the hills and skinning moose and working with very rich people from around the world. But it was working with very rich, successful people from around the world where I'm like, they got enough money to come here. This is nothing to them. They just smoked through 2 boxes of Cubans, and this guy's like minting it in banking or real estate or whatever. But it's just, you saw things and you realize all businesses were not equal, and if you can realize that at a young age, there's that. And then secondarily, to your point about like working in family businesses, it's, it's tough because like you've got to be thinking about who's going to get it. Like that business wasn't going to survive of my father's unless I took it. And if I wasn't going to take it, then somebody outside the family would have to take it, and similarly with the other side of my family, I definitely saw tensions with certain things. And when I had the opportunities to scale up my involvement, I decided I really wanted to do my own thing and avoid that and dodge it. And I don't know if it was the right or wrong decision, but at the end of the day, I was my own man. But I had to work a lot harder to start from scratch.
When you're guiding or helping guide these trips for rich people in Alaska, did you ask them? I mean, they clearly had an impact on you, and they were inspirational to what you decided to do with your own life. Do you remember talking to them about their businesses or their careers?
And their lives. I don't, you might be just a couple years younger than me, but I got to tell you, there's some things that impacted me so much. I think growing up in the 80s, the Cold War hugely impacted me because I lived in Alaska and it was on the front lines of the Cold War. And, nightly we'd get reports of bear bomber incursions into our airspace. I lived right next to the largest military base. I saw A-10 Warthogs going over my house constantly, Cobra gunships. Like it was on my mind as a kid. So like that's a very different thing than what kids have grown up with in the past few decades when you just have these visceral experiences that show you kind of how close you are to something. And I think that was kind of a backdrop for context. And I was still meeting people that were World War II veterans in Alaska. But more so some of these hunters that would come from Europe or from the lower 48 were in that age group. They were coming out of World War II. So the irony is it was less about the business and it was more about their lives that impacted me. I met one guy who was a stormtrooper, not Nazi, but like a German stormtrooper that spent 5 years in a gulag in Russia. And this is a guy who's the happiest, nicest guy you ever meet, hanging out, hunting with him. At the time, he probably had to be, I mean, this is in late 70s. He was in his 60s, right? Big, tall, healthy guy, and saw life so simply because he'd been reduced down to nothing and built it all back up. Stuff like that, you never
How did
forget.
he see life? What do you remember from that conversation?
Just the simple of enjoyment of just meeting people, the enjoyment of a hunt, right? And getting back to nature. And, he'd always enjoyed hunting, but this is a guy who was tortured for 5 years after World War II. Many of those guys did not survive the gulags after the Russians took over Germany. So like that was an experience. Every summer when I was going to the camp, I'd stop over in a village called Sleepmute, which is 160 miles downstream from our camp. And there was a family there of Slovakian descent, I believe. And the man that owned the largest mercury mine in the world, which was in Red Devil, Alaska. And so it was this weird scenario of like wealth in the middle of nothing, the middle of nowhere, right? 4 planes sitting out there on floats, and we'd go fishing just to kill some time in some remote lake. And so I saw wealth. I saw extreme wealth in the strangest of places. And then I'd intersect them with them, at our camp. But the common element I found was that people could find simple pleasures. They could delay gratification for significant periods of their life, huge periods, and they could survive anything, and yet they could succeed at any level. Didn't have to be here or there, but there was a baseline. Most people today would be like, I don't know what I would do. You do what everyone does. You find a way to survive. You find a way to take simple pleasures from life. So the strange thing is, like, I think it all kind of led to my view of like, I can take anything, and I'm willing to take anything, and I'm willing to delay gratification for 10 or 20 years on something. I started to grow a lot of patience for the big picture and no patience for the smaller day-to-day things that I'd broken down as part of my larger problems, if that makes any sense. But these people really gave me a lot of perspective. And so uh, I feel like when I finally came to the lower 48, ready to kind of do whatever, and that's what we called, the rest of the country was the lower 48.
I love that.
We, yeah, I just, I was full of these memories and stories and so proud of the family and what they had carved out of nothing. My family was 20 years into Alaska, building a life in Alaska. When I was born, my grandfather moved from Washington to build this construction company and been very successful and raised a successful family and basically minted every one of his kids, minted him a millionaire. And so to me, that's the most successful thing. I think you're judged more on the merits of what you leave behind. That always really impacted me. So I had both sides are very, very different, but just impacted me, I guess, in significant ways of my perspective. Yeah. Hopefully it helped me just not make a lot of assumptions about things in life.
Did you know, at what point did you know you wanted to go to the lower 48 and launch your life there?
I think pretty early, like in high school, I started really thinking about the opportunities available to me. I'd love to say I was one of those students where I was like, I had it all figured out. I was going to go to Harvard or do this or that. I kind of screwed around a little bit. I did well, any of the subjects I attacked, but because I think I'd had a lot in front of me, I guess my hand was in the cookie jar in a few places, and I'd work on this with my family, or I'd think about it, various directions I could go in. I don't think it was really right towards the end of high school. I started getting serious and worrying a little bit about what college I was going to go to, or what. But yeah, basically I had family in Seattle and they kind of helped me get oriented. And then I quickly set my sights on UW and getting my business degree. But I probably cost myself a little bit of time, a year or two, to kind of get into the flow of things because I just been working and enjoying working. And so I was never going to be like on this immediate academic career, but I did finish my undergrad and eventually came to Chicago for graduate school. So it was inevitable I was going to get down there and do it, but I was kind of kicked myself. My kids now really get an earful, like they are going straight to college. Like dad screwed around and had a couple of jobs and had fun and made some money and then realized he definitely didn't want to do that either.
Yeah. Now, I do want to get into the kid side of it. I think it's important to see like what lessons you've learned and how you're passing that on to your kids. I mean, I guess before we do, let's talk a little bit more about the e-commerce side of it. So you wanted something scalable. You moved south. What attracted you to e-commerce, I guess, besides the scalability of it?
Well, I had been working on some software that probably wasn't as leveraged via e-commerce as before e-commerce really kind of hit early on. I was still going to the University of Washington, but yeah, probably right around, I think it's 97, 98. Obviously, Bezos, Amazon was starting to crop up. Some of my friends picked up jobs, like really early jobs. Like I'm talking like first 20 or 30 people there. And, but so we were kind of seeing, like, I remember seeing the Amazon, like private placement prospectus circulate with my neighbor. And I'm looking at it going, this guy's doing 160 million in revenue. What? And so I think that got really interesting. And so I was working with some folks on kind of the hardware and improvement space and kind of leveraging existing physical distributors to do the drop shipping. And I worked principally like on the merchandising, kind of all the digital merchandising and making sure we could kind of scale out the catalogs. That was probably my first taste, of really working with large data sets and trying to, and the problems of cleaning it. But yeah, I just really, really loved the scale that came with that, and the marketing challenges. This is back when, I mean, no one had an e-commerce software package. No one had a cart. No one had the payment processing code. There was no GitHub. Admittedly, one of the engineers, the only way we got the payment processing is we had to steal an engineer from a porn company with this guy. Eventually the FBI was chasing him. So the founder, so it's probably good those engineers got out of there. But like the things you had to do to even find the talent to put the software together to process a credit card, securely. Like it was just crazy the things we were doing. But absolutely loved the internet. Once that bug hit, it was over, and that company got sold pretty quickly. Also learned some lessons
Yeah, I
about.
was gonna talk about that. Was that your first exit?
So I was an investor and employee in that. Wasn't the CEO of that company. That was an okay exit, but at the end of the day, I learned a really big lesson in terms of, and I'm not going to say the name because I don't want to talk ill of kind of some of the deal flow, but or kind of how it went down. It was really interesting back then because you had a lot of high flying VC firms knocking on the door. And basically, you and I are probably familiar with term sheets and kind of how that works. But when you sign a term sheet, you better follow through. If you want to do other term sheets in the future, especially if it's like with someone like Kleiner Perkins. And yeah, let's just say that somebody might have signed a couple term sheets and the less optimal outcome hit, but that
How
was my first exposure to seeing kind of venture investing and just how quickly things moved and how easily someone could swing a $10 million check on a group of guys in a crappy little loft in Pioneer Square.
No, that's a big check even for today. Like, what was the size of your company at that point,
I think it
revenue
was like
wise?
8 or 9 people. Yeah.
Revenue wise, you remember?
Trying to remember if it was up to a couple million or something like that. For those times, a couple million in e-com revenue would be pretty significant, but it's been a while. But yeah, it was something to watch. It happened really, really fast. Um, but what you were talking about, fast forward a few years, ultimately, if you were in e-commerce, and I'd had the privilege of having Bezos come to one of my graduate classes at UW and talk to us when he was just starting to move out of books into electronics and CDs, music, right? And so it was starting to become very apparent in the late 90s that this guy was after all product categories and kind of extending that engine. He was pretty open about it. So, if you were taking down a category as big as hardware, you were like, okay, shit, we got to get in and get out, at some point. And so I think that was also, um, one of the one of the themes that comes up every time is, especially if you're venture backed, you got a timeline. You got a timeline for the investors to get out. You may have a timeline due to competition, in a sweet spot to maximize, I think, a return, and back then tides could shift seismically. Even if you were the first, the second mouse could come in and get the cheese. And Amazon was the ever present reminder, that, it doesn't matter how much money you're raising, it's going to be nothing to those guys. And literally, I remember meeting with them after they didn't get the deal. And I think it was like a month later, and they literally just made like a $50 million acquisition and just bought a company that just gave them the engine for the whole category. And I was like, holy shit, good thing we got out.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I want to fast forward a little bit to you're now in Chicago at Channel Velocity working with eBay. What? So obviously people know eBay for being the place where everyone, their mother can take products and sell them, but your insight was to partner with large brands to bring them on that platform. What drove you to that conclusion that this could be an interesting channel for them?
A girlfriend. So this, I normally don't start businesses based on relationships, but yeah, a girlfriend of mine, in Seattle had been doing a bunch of reverse logistics software, which if you think about apparel, 30% of apparel ends up going back, and taking things back through the supply chain is an ungodly mess. But with the internet, with software, all of a sudden there's a way to start streamlining that data and ingesting that product. And there are very inefficient recovery processes for products. And some of them are very attractive, laptops, Xboxes, maybe some not so attractive, like underwear and socks. But like, the interesting thing was, kind of as the Beanie Baby craze was kicking in, we were starting to chart eBay's growth, and eBay was starting to get into all different products, and these markets were organically growing at just an amazing pace. And so
And
we
when you
were
say
looking at,
chart, were you actually collecting data? Because this is going to play into some later businesses you're
yeah, we were
doing.
we were from wherever we could get data, and then we actually reached out to Meg Whitman too, and she like responded, and because we were like, hey, we want to really talk to you about this intersection of reverse logistics and eBay as a natural market to dispose of them efficiently, because it is a bazaar, right? It is kind of like this messy marketplace. So yes, your mother could go and sell a collectible on there, but if you had a returned item you could sell for half the original price, that's going to be a pretty good recovery to the retailer that owned it, or the brand that ends up with it. Uh, and you got a happy customer on the other area. And then normally it wouldn't have been a great channel if you really looked at it beyond. And again, 2001, and by the way, like Ty and the Beanie Babies, that's all out of Chicago. That guy was crazy. He was minting so many Beanie Babies. So like Beanie Babies at some point, I think it was 10 or 20% of all sales on eBay.
That's insane.
But
Yeah.
we were projecting the non-Beanie Baby sales and trying to kind of piece that together. And there was a few analysts that had some decent data, uh, and we were looking at a market that was going to hit like 50 billion, in a few years. And we're like, this thing's way bigger than Amazon or any other digital outlet, single digital outlet. So we started really kind of mapping the intersection of these companies and going, okay, well, what are the most valuable products to consumers with the lowest recovery rates where we could create some efficiencies, whether it be logistically, repair wise, whatever. And so we started reaching out to like Philips Electronics and landed them as a customer. And the most interesting one to me, honestly, was Nespresso. Like, we called Nespresso up and we're like, and I would have thought, no, they wouldn't do it. But they were like, no, 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 no. We have like all these extra machines that we may not be selling. We have some refurbished machines, but they're like, but here's the deal. It's the razor and razor blades model. Like, even if we recover 30% on these things, every one that you sell, there is unit economics that follow that for our capsules. So have at it. So next thing I know, we have truckloads of Nespresso machines, and we become the largest seller in the world, single seller, probably, maybe outside of Macy's, of Nespresso machines, and I'm selling 20, 30,000 of these a year. But it was like we get into these niche businesses and, we had Philips, we had Nespresso, we had
And at this point, these were not just returned items. I mean, it started off with reverse logistics, but
new in box in some cases too. Usually, listen, it was anything that was kind of slow moving, or refurbished. But but yeah, I mean, we sold a lot of product. So we always just likened ourselves to kind of a digital outlet mall. So we just build programs for major brands. So we built out warehousing infrastructure, call center, payment processing. We were completely vertically integrated as a retailer. And then eventually we expanded to direct website, Amazon. And we were very, very early on. I think we had one competitor, Accenture, came into the space with the similar idea. And then Accenture left the space because they couldn't really execute and make any money at it. And again, another interesting lesson there. But we also learned it was tough to scale a consignment model. We had to start taking inventory risks. Sometimes we'd buy the product, but we knew the market so well. We never lost money. So very, very interesting business. Didn't have to raise a whole lot of money. I wouldn't say it was a kind of a venture backable type of business. So the good thing is, we never really went beyond some basic angel financing with that. But yeah, that was interesting, and that model still exists today, but at a much larger scale. Because what it really, if you fast forwarded like 5 years or more from where we were, it was directly headed, and we were really thinking about how it would be better as a function of a FedEx or a UPS. But like, if you own the logistical functions and the warehousing and the scale and the distribution networks, it's really, really easy to just kind of plug in large scale with these marketplaces. And so we saw, about 10 years ago, these types of businesses started morphing into, I'm trying to remember some of the names, but I mean, there were a couple companies, worth $1 billion or more, private equity backed, and they would literally just go buy businesses where people had carved out a niche on Amazon. But it shifted more to Amazon than eBay, because Amazon eventually overtook them and could do deeper. They could do more velocity, more volume, and really, yeah, evolved in a lot of different ways. And then a lot of companies would just have you sell their new product for them on Amazon to create the presence, and kind of push out unwanted sellers, because they viewed Amazon as a channel that they didn't want somebody buying product for their e-commerce business over here, or a distributor. What's worse, a distributor who leaks it onto Amazon to make a few extra bucks. So, in the latter years, we were doing some of these types of deals where we were kind of building out a lot more branded outlets and things. And again, biggest lesson from that one, that was probably the most maturing I took as an entrepreneur, but the biggest lesson from that one is bring up your Porter's five forces, model for that market that you're in, and make sure that you've got some reasonable power in one direction or the other. Because if you're working underneath a couple monopolies, the pricing power on the fees and things like that. We started calling eBay Feebay.
What was the conclusion of running the Porter's analysis? Like that you guys didn't have as
The
much power, or
conclusion was it would never be a venture backable business. The best returns would be from organic growth. That we'd never fully control our destiny in terms of being able to make markets for the product. We would always be reliant on Amazon and eBay because you could never get a return on investment the customer acquisition costs were just going to be too high. And to this day, it's still the case. But invariably, what was nice is we got a spin-off out of that business that was a really nice dividend, and that was the company I subsequently sold in 2016. But
so
we ended up building a data business out of that business because we had to understand the markets. We had to educate people on those markets. So we leveraged our relationships to pull this data back from eBay and build these looks at the market and educate people.
I'm super curious about the data business, but I'm also curious about like how. So you realize that business was, again, had reached a certain point. You weren't bullish that it was going to continue to grow. What were some of the economics at that point, like EBITDA margins, like revenues? Yeah, to then like
Yeah,
work into that transition.
yeah. Our average commission was probably 25 to 30% net of fees. As the price went up, we were going more for margin dollars than percentages. So, we might make 8% on a plasma, and we might make 30% on an espresso machine. So we didn't take risk often in inventory. If we did, we better make more margin. But yeah, I think it was just looking at like, okay, what are we doing that is unique? I mean, we know how to make a market. Yeah, we built some software, but again, like other people can come into these markets and start selling the product, and you kind of pitch for the business. And listen, if I had a relationship with a client, there's a good chance I can hang on to it. The other challenge was, you had to get to certain scale, which we did. So some product would show up unannounced, right? Stuff would show up, and then there'd be nothing for 2 months, and then you'd be working on something else. But, if you got 30 or 40 clients, you've got some decent scale, and it worked pretty well. If I had to do it all over again, I would have built a better model to just take the inventory risk and just buy the liquidated product. Just the irony is we tried to build a benefit for our customers, and no matter, and you get some people, some people would get the religion and they're great partners, and others are like, if I can just get 50 cents in the dollar, I'm good, man. And so the consignment model was one, it was a tough one. So you just needed to be better capitalized. And I think that's kind of what happened. We did more and more deals where we just set up, they'd give us preferential pricing, and we just buy it on terms and move it, and we'd buy whatever we needed to move. And we started, migrating to that. But yeah, in the end, I think the people that have won with the big plays, probably the ones that sold to the private equity, 10 years ago or so, where they might have gotten to 50 million in sales, flipped the company. I think the private equity companies took a huge bath as valuations came down, right, after 2021, the peaks in purchasing, the valuations. I think, it was probably 21, early 22, and then everything started sliding. But people were selling stuff for crazy prices, and God bless them. They did pretty well for a ready-made market, and they're just shoving product up there. But yeah, but that thus ended kind of my, my e-commerce journey, and we operated it for a while longer, but it just wasn't worth kind of chasing for an exit. We could have waited 4 or 5 years and kind of grown to where the market eventually kind of got to that point where everyone was getting snapped up. but we ended up catching a tiger by the tail just on the side, and it became vastly bigger than the original business, and we just kind of rode that.
It's just okay. So talk more about that data business. It sounds like as you continue to operate the original company in parallel, but that was sort of like a controlled descent, and they prioritized the data business.
Yeah, I mean, within 2 years of both operating, you could kind of see that one was never going to be worth more than a few $1,000,000. And at one point, maybe somebody, it's worth working for a few $1,000,000. But the other one just went like this. And it was a SaaS subscription model with high retention, high net revenue retention, high growth. And we were really, I would say, the first to market. And so we were like, oh my God, like in 2 months or 3 months, we literally created another 3 million in enterprise value. So I think I know where we better just focus our time. And so
that
basically, yeah, we started pivoting the business in, this would be like 2009, 2010.
So I was going to ask on this data company. You guys were gathering e-commerce data on how much how much product they were selling, what the pricing was. Is that data that you guys were just like scraping from the different platforms like eBay? Did you have licenses to some of those guys to buy it? How did that work?
Both. Yeah, both. So we always had a long-standing relationship with eBay, Amazon. So there was large data sources we were getting data from. But as we evolved it, we were doing more and more and more scraping. 5, 6 years in before we sold, I think we were probably crawling data, from 2 or 3,000 different sites, and we probably had a team of 12 people that did nothing but build and maintain those robots. So I had a team in Madrid, Spain, of all these students that had studied in the US and moved back and studied here in Chicago, and we'd hire them and then had an office for them to work in when they got back after their graduate degree. But yeah, a lot of data, a lot of data gathering. But when I look back on it, it's actually a pretty small amount compared to what people are doing now today. We ended up maybe tracking about 1 million products for clients, I think, at our peak.
Wow. And that company was Channel IQ, or was that the next one? Channel IQ. Okay. And then you sold that business, right? What's talk me through that.
Yeah, so we went through a sale process, ended up selling it to a Chicago-based company called MarketTrack, which eventually rebranded as Numerator after it was bought by, I think, the second or third private equity company.
I know Numerator. That's
They're pretty good size now. Pretty good size company. Back then they really couldn't crack the market for. I'd say they were having trouble really competing with us when it came to servicing brands with data. Maybe not so much, retail, and essentially, yeah, if you can't beat them, join them, right? But we had just I think we got really good at kind of the value and the pricing. And we were really, really good at sales ops. We had a good sized sales team, incredible sales ops process. And so we were kicking every rock over you could imagine and building relationships. So it's nice when you have a lot of customers that your competitors don't know about. And we were very strategic about that. Like we wouldn't announce every customer. We'd only announce customers where we had competition on the deal. Because then it was a known contract, right? But anything where we scooped it up, we stayed mum. And, I remember when we were in the final sales process, one of the comments was, we had no idea you had this many customers. And I'm like, that's great.
That's the art of war. When you got to constantly camouflage what your actual capabilities are against your enemies.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that. There's marketing to get the customers, but you definitely want to be limited. But what we did is we We built a premium brand, in terms of the data quality, but mostly the way that we understood how to speak the language of brand owners, and interpret and take our data and interpret it in a way that they could act on it and get some value out of it, where a lot of people were just data dumps. Like, hey, I'm just some software guy. Here you go. Here's an export. And that doesn't really work. I think as SaaS was evolving, people were demanding more and more out of their vendors. And if you're selling a data product, they're really demanding the explainability, they're demanding quality, they're demanding coverage. And so we had to work really, really hard to do that. But we made, because we came out of this world of servicing brands for so many years, we knew how they thought. We knew that they hated channel conflict. We knew how much they valued the retail channels that they had built and assembled with their partners. So when you came in and you're like, I have data that's going to show who your good partners are and who the bad ones are and how to fix it, namely how to fix it, all of a sudden you go from a data dump for 10 grand a year to a partnership that's worth $250,000 a year, where we could manage certain aspects of that service and fundamentally fix the problems for them. And that was the big, I think, yeah, it was a huge learning for me, because now I understood software, I understood data products, and I really understood how to effectively sell it for a premium, and create a lot of value. And in that case, we had gone from a $4 million valuation to a $12 million valuation to a $32 million valuation, bang, 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 on a fairly small amount of invested capital, because we were squeezing every part of the business. We were maximizing what we sold the data for. We were minimizing what we paid for it. In this case, not a lot.
I was going to say, can you talk more about that? Because it's, yes, if you're crawling, you're scraping the internet for data. Data is essentially free, besides like the labor costs. And you're just saying that you understood how to effectively sell the data for a premium. What does it take to turn free data into something brands spend a lot of money on?
Yeah. So first and foremost, certain data is free. There's still a cost to get it. But that is the funny thing, is if you look at the Pareto, right, the acquisition cost is like this, right? But the data that you ultimately need to sell, basically the quality part, is this, right? And so we land the data. Most of it we can use because they're public facts. But for example, like, I can't go and resell Amazon's reviews. They own that review content. That's intellectual property. But I could aggregate the average of ratings, or I could use machine learning to do sentiment analysis on top of it, and I could sell that, right? So there were first off, there's certain products that we could build off of it and investments we'd have to make. But we were in the early days where people just really wanted the pricing, and they needed these products matched, all the retail products matched to their manufacturer SKUs, so they could quickly go through their catalog and just go, where are my problems? Who's promoting out of cycle, who's discounting, who's potentially selling counterfeits. We did a lot of that too. So it had to be incredibly precise and comprehensive. We had to find everything, and then we had to boil it down and eliminate any false positives. Because the worst thing you can do in a data business, I think, especially one where you're getting paid a lot because it's a big problem, is report a false positive where you're saying, hey, this person's doing something wrong with your product. And then they reach out and scream and yell, and then they find out it was the wrong SKU, or it was a refurbished SKU, just something entirely different. So you start building kind of that algorithm for what you should clean, what you should fix. Like, okay, now we got this big pile of data, but they only care about this box. So we can put human beings on this. And this is before machine learning, right? So we'd have to put people on that, but we'd have to make sure we matched everything up before we could run the analysis. And so, we had a whole room of people that just cleaned and fixed the data. And if I have yet to run into a significant data company that doesn't have a room of people somewhere, usually very large, hundreds of people offshore. Oftentimes, we hired everyone onshore because we wanted them well trained and people that really understood the context of U.S. products. And a lot of the larger guys would offshore it. But we put in, if our acquisition cost was a penny, we probably put in 25 cents of data quality work, let's say. But then that got us to something that we could sell and support. If we returned out of 30,000 records, we returned 300 that they cared about that were problems, and we had one false positive in there. They're like, okay. But imagine taking that down from 30,000 just for one brand down to just no more than one false positive, and the kind of the algorithm that you come up with. And today, and I know we haven't even touched on generative AI, but what I could have done with generative AI back then, but then we needed human beings that had pattern recognition, right? That could kind of apply those algorithms, as they saw more and more of the data, they get better and better at kind of assessing these issues. Cause you could only do so much with software and just rules and things of that nature. But it was a mess. It was like making sausage. It looked really good when it came out though.
Yeah. No, it's a great point about how hard it actually is to, yes, the data is free or cheap to get, but then the processing of it, the cleaning of it is where the real work begins. And that's ultimately what the clients want, to your point about they have very high expectations on what the false positive rates can be. And if you don't hit that, then they discount the whole thing. But to get such a high level of accuracy, you need to put a lot of work into it.
Yep.
And okay, so you sell that business and you start Unifyd. It sounds like that was much more about this exact problem that we're just discussing, where it's not so much about one particular data set, but it's about the engineering, the behind the scenes work that cleans the data to make it more valuable.
Yeah. So I think we had, there was a group of us, that from the day one, we were building very crude tools for matching and just the data quality steps. And just through that experience and the millions of dollars we expended doing that, uh, we were like, there has to be something better. And I was sitting on a non-compete for 2.5 years. And so I'm like, what am I going to do with myself? I can't do one of these. Well, I could do the system that makes one of these. And it had just been nagging at me. And I had been following kind of the trajectory of big data and machine learning. And there was this intersection, right? Because nobody really knew how to process through the vast amounts of big data, especially if it was unstructured. And most of what we were working with is, I would probably classify as semi-structured. When you talk about data that you've at least extracted from the web, it's starting to make some sense. But then as we looked at these new machine learning models, we were starting to find ways that we could categorize or extract attributes like, colors of iPhones. But the big problem was really just matching like for like items, because the human mind, the way we organize things, we are classification engines. Like when we process information, and I mean, you're in this business, you deal with data. No one approaches a big pile of data without first starting to kind of go, okay, this is this, this is this, this is this, this is this. All right, I got that. Now I'm going to break it down in smaller and smaller pieces, and I'm going to build an ontology, and I'm going to build, category structure. And now I understand it. So think of a software that allows someone to do that with a big pile of data. Just how much you've got to piece together to do that. And I mean, we're still working on that and adding features to that system, but we couldn't find a low code and in this case, what I really wanted was a no code system that would just pull data out of data lakes and do classification, entity extraction, matching, enrichment, everything. And out the other end is bang, a ready-made analytical product for, a company or even for a data company that needs a better engine to do it. And today we provide it for both. But yeah, we started really cracking on that. And that's probably one of the harder intellectual challenges I've had in my life, is building that stack and going through the various challenges in getting that to scale because you're trying to reduce it down to an interface that an analyst can understand and train the machine learning on. Really, you're just trying to capture someone's innate knowledge of a certain area of data. But suffice to say, I think we succeeded, and it's a pretty sophisticated piece of software. And a lot of learnings from that.
And at what point did you decide to go down the cannabis data routes? Was that the use case that came from the Unifyd product that you had built?
Yeah, and in fact, I'd had a couple people hit me up along the way, talking about the cannabis market. I didn't really have a strong interest. I mean, I thought it was too small, like in the CPG market. Even to this day, the technology, the market just for data and technology vendors is probably 200 or 300 times the size that of cannabis, right? And so uh, I had been focusing principally on CPG and some beverage and alcohol clients, but where we were having a lot of luck because we did build this with the thought of dealing with kind of the worst of the worst kind of data, web data, POS data. We we were working with people on cosmetics data or grocery data, historically, or apparel data, let's say, but historically really, really difficult information versus like matching TVs. Consumer electronics is very easy. It's very kind of easily understood and identifiable. And like clothing, you're not swapping out SKUs every 3 months. So along comes cannabis, and we kind of had a choice because we had enough cannabis business, and then we had a merger available to kind of expand that business overnight into kind of I guess, a 7-figure spinoff. And so, there's two principal reasons. Number one, it really needed to be like a professional services and a SaaS business similar to Channel IQ that just sold data. Um, and uh, and I think nature of the business model just was vastly different than selling software infrastructure. So also, I mean, we needed to build some fairly robust software application on top of it. So it was just going to look very, very different. But once we kind of resized the market, and the market had kind of 3x'd just in the time that I'd kind of learned about it, it was a great opportunity. And in this case, because it's not like I needed to be running two businesses, but we merged with a company that had some ex-Nielsen folks that were pretty well versed in building a data business and supporting clients in that nature. And so it made it a little easier to kind of break off and build that business. Because I think as I've matured, I definitely can't be all things. I was the sole founder at Channel IQ, and that that was very rough going, hitting 100 employees, and you got people to lean on, don't get me wrong, but it's lonely. So the choice to kind of spin off the cannabis business was also, hey, I think that we can build a stronger team. I can get something that's living and breathing up pretty fast. And that was the case, it's about 40 people.
So say more about that. So you spun out the cannabis business with some former Nielsen folks, that you brought them on as partners. Is that where your the framework? Okay. And what was going from being a sole founder to bring on partners, especially not people that you like, not other colleagues they promote into that role. These are external people. What was that like? Was it, yeah, was it seamless? Were there some certain things that like lessons you've learned about what it takes to bring on other co-founders or partners?
Yeah, I think I learned a lot really being before that. Uh, Learned a lot also through my YPO forum. Again, really an invaluable journey in my life. Talking to really deep talks with other founders. And basically, I think the things that were top of mind when we were first meeting was making sure that we had the same views on when I say something's good or something's bad, do they see it in the same light? I think one of the hardest things to assess outside of just personality, and if you can spend years with someone working with them, it's just do they have the same standards that you have in terms of whether it's your ethics, your values? Do they have the same standards in terms of the quality that you demand? That's a very hard thing to find. And if you don't, or if you have differences, how are they going to resolve it? Are you going to find people that can handle criticism and bounce back, and and you can keep a relationship going? And yeah, I mean, wish I had like a ton of answers on that, but you try to assess it the best you can. And there's probably nothing quite like building a product, selling it, and dealing with customers. And I would say even more so doing the M&A work and coming out the other end of it, and everyone's shaking hands and hugging and feeling pretty good about the whole deal. So, at the end, I felt pretty good about it. But outside of selling, this is probably the first time I'd ever kind of combined with another business.
So, as you reflect back on your career, you've had a number of different companies. You're looking into e-com, and there is about understanding like that the evolution into these marketplaces. You pivot into data. What advice would you have for entrepreneurs that are either trying to figure out an idea to work on, or maybe they're already working on something but it's not quite working out? When do you pivot? How much strategy is involved with that versus just circumstances? Because it sounds like some of your businesses where I had to not compete, so I couldn't really do that same thing. So I came up with something one layer below. And in some other ones were like customer driven, or there's something that was pulling you in a certain direction. Yeah, what advice do you have for people to think about when to pivot or which direction to go down?
I think a lot about this when I think about my kids, and in a few years, I'm going to be trying to advise them on things. Selfishly, right? We all think about our kids versus just the random guy in the street or entrepreneur we might talk to, but it probably would be the same thing in both cases. I think a couple of things, and it goes beyond just entrepreneur. It's like if I were telling my kids today, um, how to think about careers. Number one, even though management consulting isn't doing as good as it's done in the years past, if you can find a job that's going to give you exposure to a lot of different businesses, industries, influential people, take it. Build a career there for a while, figure out if you like it. But if anything, just learn how the world works, and you're going to I'm very opportunistic. I mean, if I was, if I had could wind back the clock, I would have chased a management consulting job day one, now knowing what I know, just so I could just see as much as I could see and take my time to pick a great moment and opportunity to do something really big. Because if you think about it, like every startup should start with a customer. But if you talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of times it starts with an idea before the customer. And there's a lot of thrashing there. And a lot of people are like, well, yeah, I might get something from a potential customer here, there. But there's nothing like somebody that's willing to articulate a problem, give you some sense of the solution and how much they might pay for it. And if you can go repeat that process a few times and it's there, and you've got an early customer for something you'll build, that I won't even look at doing anything anymore unless that is present. Because every time I thought my idea was right, I was freaking wrong. I was wrong. Every time I had it partly right. And I can't get enough of it in my brain. I haven't seen enough of it. If I'd been in management consulting, I would have seen enough of it. And that's why you see a lot of those people go on to create some very successful careers and go on to run some interesting companies. And I'm not saying they're all made for entrepreneurship, but somebody who's patient, waiting for the right entrepreneurial opportunity, there's certain jobs out there that can be very, very good. So that'll be the advice I give to my daughter and my son. They may do things entirely, but that's one of the areas. But definitely find the customer. Spend more time finding the customer if you have a sense that there's a problem in that area, and validate it first. By all means, get a paying customer lined up and reduce as much risk as possible. So every time that I've had a success, every time I've had where I feel like the runway was pretty long and things went right, I had it fall in my lap versus I had an idea, I kind of chased it and I just forced it. So I've never had a business I didn't make work. Every one of them worked, but some worked better than others. And those were always the ones where it was just like, there's like 10 people that just told me the same problem and they're literally pulling out their checkbooks. And it is that easy. It might be something that's somewhat difficult to build, but like, I'm not scared of the time and the money to build it. So most people just miss that disconnect of going and just getting into the market and getting the answers and backing the product out. And they flip it. And it's a terrible mistake. And it'll waste years of your life. And it wastes many years because you may never get that startup right. And so it was always kind of quick to react and jump in on an opportunity and chase the buck. And in some cases, I should have taken a little more time and applied certain frameworks, right, to kind of analyze the problem and kind of tick and tie it in a way where I'm like, okay, now I'm really sure of what this looks like. Let's go. That's probably the biggest one that I find myself repeating to people these days.
Yeah, that's such amazing advice. I love that. And yeah, it's oftentimes, like you said, someone else's great idea that you then just execute on. And that's like
It's always execution.
yeah.
Every market I've gotten into, I've worked through all the early guys that have fallen off. I've grown and navigated the challenges, whether it was capital at one point, financial capital or human capital, or gaps in the market, gaps in my product, whatever it was. Those were easier to see once we were in and navigate. But those early months of really clarifying the problem and getting that product right, and just making sure that we should be even going in at all and just correctly sizing the opportunity, it just eliminates so much downstream pain. Like with the cannabis industry, I wasn't intent on raising money from venture. I liked the idea of getting it from angel and doing something in the middle. And ultimately, we could build a 25 to $50 million business in this space and never have really raised from any name you would recognize. And that's one route. Other people want to, do something really, really, really big, but this wouldn't be the industry to do it. At least not for now. And I'm trying to think of anything else. Like, I think it's just going back to people or picking the founders again. You're going to be really blessed if you have people you've known for several years, because someone you've known, for 3, 4, 5 years or more, you know them. There's no hiding. There's nothing they can hide. You know exactly who and what they are. And that's very easy to work with that person and work through problems. When you're moving quickly and bringing people on board, again, it's worth more and more time and more obstacles for them to work through to make sure that you're getting the right person. Because just like getting the product wrong, getting the customer wrong, you get the early hires wrong, and that's painful too. So I think I don't run into that as much anymore. But yeah, I guess you get a little more patient as you get older. You remember the pain of the mistakes that you've made, and you don't want to feel that pain again.
Well, on that note, maybe we can close the conversation by going back to the beginning and that young kid in Alaska whose dad was working out with wildlife hunting, leading these expeditions. I found it really interesting that as much of an outdoors man that your dad was, he was also a data
Yeah.
guy. You're saying was graphing out and charting out the populations of these animals, and whether or not that had conscious influence on you becoming a data guy later in life, I think is interesting. But I'm curious more about your initial quest for scale. Is it everything you hoped it would be? Do you feel like the life that your dad had living outdoors there's some magic to that life as well? You're having one-on-one conversations with people. You're not worrying about building large businesses. How do you reflect back on what matters and how to live your life?
I've spent some time doing that recently. My father passed at 95, um, a couple years back. So this is a guy who was born in 1928. So he saw some amazing things. He was in the world when it was very dangerous and very interesting all at the same time. Um, Definitely chose a path um, that wasn't interesting to me, but I got to grow up with the duality of two very, very different families with the parents, and one beckoned to me a little bit more because I really liked working. I just loved working, and I loved working on hard problems, and so I saw the business that my family was doing as very, very challenging. And as much as I enjoyed kind of the outdoors and going on, I mean, I spent so much time in riverboats and planes and cabins. I mean, I could fill a book. I wouldn't change anything about it. But it was just, I don't know how to explain it other than I almost felt like predestined, or I just felt like I was just kind of wired. I wanted to get to the big city. I just was always voracious for knowledge. I read like a book every 2 days. Like I was that kid. My nose was in a book. I was just at the library all the time. I couldn't get enough. And so I always felt like I was kind of starving as much as I'd enjoy some moments. And there might have been some ADHD or something in there where I couldn't sit still. It was never going to work for me. So it's good that I knew it. Uh, it really is. But I had the utmost respect for the life my father chose, because at the end of the day, he made the best of it. I mean, he saw things that are just simply amazing. They don't exist anymore. He saw Alaska when it was still tribal, when people were still like living a non-modern life. We saw just amazing stuff. So I tell people, I'm like, I wouldn't trade any of it at all. And all of that stuff grounded me in a way that at least I'm not coming across like some tech bro. I'm the total opposite of that. Like, I'm pretty well grounded on stuff, but at the end of the day, I'm just a geek at heart. I love data. I love scale. I love huge problems. And, if I had to start from scratch today, yeah, it would be in that vein, probably AI related, but I'd be trying to take down a really, really big problem. Uh, yeah, I don't, other than that, I don't know how to say it, but it just, uh, and I probably this is the first time on any webinar, any recording, I ever even talked about it, to be honest. Nobody even asked me this stuff, except my kids every now and then. So we're going up to fish. I'm taking my son up to Alaska to fish, actually near our old camp next year, just so he understands how good he's got it.
That's amazing. Well, I'm sure he's gonna appreciate that. It sounds like, especially living in a city for so long, being able to get out into nature and experiencing that, and just one-on-one time with your dad, it's got to be amazing. I'm sure you guys are gonna have a great time.
Be pretty cool. I think we'll do silvers, and maybe I'll pay him to fly me over the old camp, or we'll go visit it. But they're still operating it. It was sold to another family, and that's what you think about when you have kids. You want them to work hard and appreciate things, and that's the biggest thing. The ever-present thing in my mind is my kids are not going to have the experience I had to kind of frame reality and history, so they won't appreciate things as well. So I have to figure out a way to build in that appreciation and work ethic, so that when they decide what they want to do, right, they're going to do it with a lot of verve, because they're incredibly lucky to be able to do anything, frankly, to have the opportunities afforded to them. I mean, we all have amazing opportunities. So we should pick carefully, yeah.
Yeah, no, couldn't agree more. And yeah, that's something I'm struggling with as well, is like how to raise kids who are not going to be spoiled and take all these things they have for granted. So, well, Wes, it was a real pleasure hearing your life story today, and yeah, thank you so much for chatting with me.
Thank you. That's been great. I really appreciate the questions.
All right, thank you.